Hello, good evening, and welcome to Sunday Interview. I'm your host, Franklin Tambo Jr. In September 2016, in his speech during the official opening of the 5th session of the 11th National Assembly, President Edgar Lungu announced the creation of 5 new ministries. Among them was the Ministry of National Development Planning. The ministry was created to respond to the lack of achievement of set goals in the development of the country and to enhance transparency, accountability, citizenry participation in the planning and budgeting process. It is 8 months down the line since the creation of this important ministry, and we're here to find out whether the set objectives and targets are being met. And we do this today with our guest, who is Dr. Auxilia Ponga, who is the Permanent Secretary, Monitoring and Evaluation, Ministry of National Development Planning. Thank you for being on Sunday Interview and welcome.
Thank you.
Let's get straight to maybe finding out about your role as PS, Monitoring and Evaluation in this ministry.
Okay, so there are 2 PSs. One is responsible for planning and administration, and I'm responsible for monitoring and evaluation. And that actually means that in the past, we've actually looked at monitoring and evaluation like an afterthought. You have your plan and then eventually think, oh gosh, we didn't think of monitoring what we're doing. But now, having this division, we are actually designing the 7th National Development Plan, and at the same time, designing the National Performance Framework that will measure whether we are making progress and achieving the set goals that are in the 7th National Development
This could be a response to what you might call a weakness in monitoring and evaluation?
A weakness indeed in monitoring and evaluation. For those who have done monitoring and evaluation, they tell you that when you're implementing a project, you need to actually be taking data, collecting data, monitoring what you're doing and looking at whether you're making progress or not. And every so often you have to stop and check what you're doing against the targets. And we have had a tendency of just doing things, and maybe after 3, 4, 5 years we want to do an evaluation, which becomes very difficult because as you're implementing, you're supposed to be documenting what you're doing so you can learn lessons and if need be change direction and say this is not working. So there's been a weakness in the sense that we have not been very systematic in the way we actually report. So to heighten that, you saw the president calling for quarterly report meetings, and that has put everybody on the spotlight, so to say, in the spotlight to actually say, what are we doing with reporting? Because you'd ask ministries, whether it's cabinet asking, whether it's parliament asking, because we do not document on a regular basis, it's very difficult to come up with a report. And if you're implementing something and you're not documenting and learning lessons, how do you know you're actually doing the right thing? So you need the targets that you have set, and every so often look at the milestones and say, are we getting there? And look at the specific targets you've set for yourself and say, okay, that has been done, and you check. This was not achieved, and you sit. Why didn't we achieve this? Then you begin looking at things like poor financing or untimely financing, and therefore there's a delay in the implementation. Or there could be lack of skills in the people that we're supposed to be implementing. That calls then for retraining and reskilling the people you're working with. So it's a very constant companion of implementation.
Okay.
Yeah.
How would you rate your performance so far?
By the way, we've been in existence 1 year and 8 months.
Right.
And one of the biggest goals that we had to achieve was the development of the 7th National Development Plan, which so far has been approved by Cabinet, and we're looking forward to having it launched very soon. That meant we are trying to break the silo mentality in which ministries worked. So you'd go to Ministry of Health and they tell you they have an achievement because they've done the following things. And the question is that having a positive impact on health and nutrition, for example, and the well-being of the people? So we're trying to make our colleagues in the ministries realize that, for example, if I'm going to look at nutrition and well-being, health has a role to play, agriculture has a role to play. And the moment you start speaking about agriculture, you know you need water. So if you're going to grow food that is sufficient for the nation, it can't just be rain-fed. So there's interrelationship and linkages between the various sectors. So we cannot have one sector claiming to have made progress while the others are not. So which means we have to be working in collaboration with each other. Any development practitioner would tell you that development interventions require multi-sectoral approach. So if we're looking at well-being, the issues, as I said, of health, education, and agriculture play a role. If I've not been to school, I probably would not know what would cause HIV and AIDS, because I've not learned that. Or it could be I'm at home looking after an HIV AIDS a patient who may be a parent, and because I've not been educated in terms of how to handle the person, I might actually infect myself. So education is important in relation to health and well-being. So these sectors and ministries are divided so that we have focus. But in the final analysis, they must be playing in such a cohesive and interlinked manner that you have the outcome that you want. So the emphasis now in the 7th National Development Plan is not so much the activities, it's the outcome. What will success look like? What would development look like? So you have that as an outcome, and then work backwards to actually see that you have measured and implemented. So if you picked the past national development plans, you would have a sector on health and a sector on education. You will not find that in the 7th National Development Plan. Basically because we're saying the outcome might be economic diversification and job creation. Then you say, who else has a role to play in this? When you ask that kind of a question, you have education, if you're going to have skilled people who you're going to employ. You have Ministry of Labor to set the standards of this employment, the wages, decent wages and all that. But you also need Ministry of Agriculture, Commerce, Trade and Industry, Energy, if you're talking diversification. So the moment you say that, then you begin sequencing. So in this economic diversification or job creation, who comes first? Who has the first role to play? Which is the next sector to build on? So now you really have to create synergies between the various sectors and constantly working together so that you say we have achieved the first layer, the next layer comes with the various sectors who build on until we get to the outcome.
It would appear to be then that this is something that cannot be done in haste.
No.
Because you've got transition issues and adaptability issues. But the common man out there is in a hurry to see development, is in a hurry to see progress, is in a hurry to see, tangible results.
Yes, the common person out there wants tangible results. But you can only have results if you have sat down and thought through. What are we going to achieve? Because I think that we have had results in the past. Our economy for some time was growing at the level of, I think, 5 to 7%, and we felt we're growing. But the level of poverty was not tackled, and the level of unemployment was still quite huge. So we're saying, if we're going to have development that is holistic, even if the common person out there wants to see results, we don't want a lopsided development where a few people have everything they need and then the bulk of the population is living in poverty. So for that to happen, yes, you need a plan, and that we have. Yes, you need a performance framework, and that we have. But then, as you're saying, we quickly need then an implementation plan from each of the sectors, but not in isolation, working in clusters, where they say, if the outcome is economic growth, what are we going to do? And I think, for me, I want to believe that when you have set a good foundation, I think the putting up of the structure is quicker, and it's firm. So even if people are in a hurry, I think we need to understand that we need a good foundation. We need, like you have said correctly, transition from me working in silo because I'm this particular ministry and have nothing else to do with that. And one way we're doing that is every time we have a meeting, we actually have to bring everybody together, as many people as possible from the various sectors. So we sit and we say, we're looking at tuberculosis. The immediate sector that will come to mind might be health. And then we might think maybe agriculture because these people must eat. But if you keep asking who else needs to be here, and I want to borrow an example from the UK, I think in the 40s, they too had a challenge of tuberculosis. In the end, they resolved it by housing. Bigger spaces, fewer people, and less crowding.
But how quick should you be in coming up with tangible results? I mean, Zambians have seen so much of think tanks get together. They go to Vonga to think, and they come back, and we're still thinking. And there's a bit of impatience, so to speak. And I know the president is impatient as well. He wants quick development. So how can you fast track the process?
We can fast track the process indeed, because I think there are some things that we are already doing. Let me go again to agriculture. We know how many people are called small-scale farmers and where they are. What we want to see in that area is increased productivity. So what does that mean? Increased productivity, if I was growing an acre of groundnuts and maybe I was just getting 40 bags, how do I get 80 bags? But the moment you increase productivity, you're actually then saying, what will I do with the excess? And I think that's where everybody gets impatient and says, can we for a moment stop exporting maize and importing stock feed or importing cornflakes? Can we be quick around that? I think that can be done very quickly. We have the statistics, we know what we are producing, we know what the gaps are. And one of the things I want to mention quickly is we've done that gap analysis. Because even if we're looking at development, we also want to look at the entire value chain, which maybe we have not done. And so we're still exporting copper in its very, very basic substance, and then importing back finished products. We're exporting agricultural products, raw materials. I think there is room for something that can be done quickly. So the manufacturing industry, the industrialization needs to kick in very quickly. And I think that the plan has taken that into consideration.
In this mention of the 7th National Development Plan, what are the focus areas?
We have 5 pillars. So we're looking at economic diversification and job creation. We're looking at human capability. And now I forget the other 3. But those are the pillars under which then all the other sectors will work. We also have focus areas of agriculture, tourism, and mining. But we are saying if we are going to achieve the level of production in agriculture that we need, or the standards in tourism that we need, we cannot avoid some conditions that need to be fulfilled. For example, agriculture can only thrive if we have sufficient water. So the sector of water development is crucial. The level of energy in this country will have to increase if we're going to have to store what we're growing or process it. So energy is important. So we have quite a number of conditions that we're saying without this, we can as well forget about moving forward. So the 3 areas that we've said let's focus on is agriculture. And because agriculture employs bulk of our people in this country, but we don't want them to remain at the peasant level or small scale. We want them to grow. And so the discussion there is how do we increase productivity, and when we do, how do we go to the next level of manufacturing and processing? And then, of course, marketing and distribution. So you've heard the president talk about us becoming the food basket of the region. It is possible. So, but how do we make that? So that's where I think for us monitoring comes in very importantly. If last year we produced 2.8 metric tons, and this year we've done 3.8, how do we jump from 3 to 7, for example? Double the figures. What is it that we can learn from what we've been doing and double that up? So I think that it is doable. And I also believe that more than us civil servants and government employees talking about this, one thing that we have taken the trouble to do is engage as many stakeholders as possible. Because this change and the transformation that the president is talking about, if it's going to happen, it must be all of us doing something about it. I have joked with people who say, I'm looking for a house to rent, and I find one and there's no toilet. I get there and I say, Boma Yanganebo. How does a person move into a house without the basics? So that's one. Two is that I have had the opportunity and the privilege to live outside of Zambia. And I begin to see that young people here, especially, you know, for parents who probably struggled a lot to go to school, they walked distances, they had challenges around lighting in the home. Now they've got these things and they want to give their children a better education. Mm-hmm. So sometimes we take away the motivation from young people by giving them everything they want. You go into what we call developed countries or the first world or whatever you want to call it, they will have a budget for the children. So you find a lot of these young kids working during holidays, going, if they're from the UK, into Europe to pick grapes during the summer, to work and earn something. Mm-hmm. For us, I think as a country, that needs to change. When do you wean off your kids? When do they actually come and participate in household chores? If you are running a farm, do you take your kids along? But we somehow want to think that giving everything to the children is loving them. But I think that we are killing their motivation to do something about their well-being and their own future. So this needs a concerted effort, in the sense that when we hear the president speak, each of us as Zambians must say, what will be my contribution, whether I'm in the private sector, in civil society, or in government? We all must take this transformation agenda personally. And only then will something happen. But if we say this is for the politicians or this is for the people in government, then we are not moving as a country. And I think for me, the message for everybody, like the ordinary person out there on the street who wants to see change, what is my contribution?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Clearly, it's the 7th National Development Plan, I want to believe, must look at what each region is able to do, competitive advantage.
Yes.
Is that something that you've tackled?
Yes, we have.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I think in the process of coming up with the 7th National Development Plan, the consultation process was both from the headquarters down to the district and the lowest ward, if you want to, but it was also bottom up. So people, even now, you hear of a lot of provinces having what they're calling either a symposium or, you know, an analysis around what they might call an indaba. Because one of the things we did was look at the various contributions of each of the provinces towards the GDP of the country. And that hit some of the ministers, and I think we have a good crop of ministers who looked at this and said, I'm in a very wealthy, naturally and well-endowed province. How can we be contributing so little? And they have been infused, therefore, to do something about the situation. So they'll be looking at, if we have lots of water in this area, how do we make agriculture be an activity that is an all-year-round activity? Mm-hmm. If we have lots of water, how do we increase the tonnage of fish? Because we are importing quite a lot. So people are beginning to look at their region, what is it that they can contribute, and then begin to say, from the center, this is our plan, and this is what how do you support us? So even as we were coming up with the 7th National Development Plan, it was a process of going through and I think for me, I need to go back. That's why we're calling the 7th National Development Plan integrated and multi-sectoral, but also recognizing that each region has its specificity, its own advantages and endowment. How do we make that part of the plan of what the ministry is coordinating? Because our role is to coordinate. And the various regions, the various ministries must come up with ideas of how they see themselves contributing to the GDP of the country.
Right. Clearly, you then need to have ventures that engage communities so that they push this agenda of contributing regionally. We do have regions that have a higher GDP than others, and I believe it starts with Copperbelt, Lusaka, Southern Province, and you've got the list in, is it the Western Province? So shouldn't the ordinary Zambian again understand, where you're coming from? Because for as long as this information is in the hands of the few, the enlightened or educated, then you probably are not fighting a winning battle.
And I think that when the process of developing the 7th National Development was going on, by the way, it took about 2 years.
Right.
To consult the stakeholders. That meant you're talking to people at the lowest level. If they're not there, their representative must be there. So that you're actually engaging people and say, we have a high level of malnutrition in this country, or in this part of the country, in this region. How do we tackle that? So each region is actually addressing the challenge that they have in the area. And the beauty, I think, about this is owning the process.
Right.
Because if I have done an analysis of my community and the challenges we have, but also the potential and the opportunities, when a plan is drawn, these people will know they were party to this process, and then they want to see the results. So this participatory approach of actually engaging, and I know that for us, we are saying, if this is going to succeed, even when we do come up with an implementation plan, either as a province or as a ministry, we need to engage everyone that has a role to play. And I think that for me, this will bring about even transformation in the way we see ourselves as civil servants and in the way we work, because we'll be held accountable. For example, this national performance framework will come up, the national, where we see where we want to be in 2030 as a country.
Right.
Working backwards, it means in the 7th National Development Plan, by 2022, we will have moved from here to there. But that means the various sectors and ministries and regions will have their own specific institutional performance framework, from which will be drawn the performance framework of the individuals that make up that ministry, the department, up to the individual level. So you can actually have targets of my performance and my key result areas that build into achieving the ministry or the province that I belong to.
Right. How do you give hope for today to that person who is in the least advantageous province, like maybe Luapula or Western Province? How do you give them hope now? There are already provinces that relatively are, well endowed and are doing better. And this person wants the results tomorrow.
And you see, the beauty of your example is actually that the lowest contributing province to the GDP also happens to be where the poverty levels are high. And yet we have had a conversation with the minister, for example, of Luapula Province, and he sees great potential. And he's organizing a symposium in July, I think, thereabout, to actually even invite investors, where they'll be taken around to be shown what this province is capable of. So we talked of the waters. They can generate electricity. And they're looking to see which investor can come and partner with them in doing that, in agriculture, in fish production. And those will create jobs. So if I am one of those lowest people there, one of the things that will be immediate for me to see would be this investment coming in the province and my getting a job. Even as we speak, you know that there are people who are actually saying we can get ethanol out of cassava. So even if I'm the poorest person, how do I increase my productivity of cassava so I have enough to eat, but there's leftover to sell for this? So as soon as factories start coming in, even the lowest person will begin to see, I can increase productivity now and be able to sell and keep some, but I'll also be able to get a job. So there will be that value chain that needs to be put in everything we do. So even if I'm growing vegetables and I grow a lot, the next question will be, can I dry some? Is there a process of making sure I don't spend hours doing that? If I can't, can I can some of these vegetables? Or can they be preserved in other forms and make sure that they're marketed and sold? I have had, at one time, I think I was working in the ministry, now the Ministry of Gender, then we were under Cabinet Office, and we traversed this country to talk about the National Gender Policy. But what I found was also, which for me, going back to the conditionalities, is infrastructure. If you go to Northern Province, people grow a lot of beans, and that beans goes on from one season to the other. The challenge is, how do they market it? So as soon as you have a project or a program where you're saying, we're going to grow beans, you must look at the next level of activity that needs to happen so that people are not storing their beans from year to year. If you come towards the Central Province and you're in Mukushi area, you find lots of sweet potatoes, lots of what we call Irish potatoes, again, lots of beans. What is the marketing strategy around the goods? Zambians should not be hungry. But maybe that also means we need to change the way we think. If I think food is when I have eaten in Nsima, Waliu, Buhove, then I'm limiting myself, because I think that when we are developing, the variety of foods that will be available to us must make us shift from thinking that you haven't eaten. So I think that there's a wealth of activity and participation in all this for everybody. And that's why for me, I think that this must be a turning point for the country, where private sector, civil society, and government are coming together to determine what Zambia is going to look like in 2030 and beyond.
There have been a lot of smooth talkers from government. They speak well, they give you the plan, they give you the vision. They're not here today, and more come. And Zambians have heard this. There have been a lot of symposiums and a lot of workshops and a lot of stories. What makes your reign any different?
Because I think that one of the things we have done is actually to measure what we're saying we are doing. So if I'm a smooth talker as I sit down here with you, one of the things you should do is pick up the National Performance Framework that tells you that 2017 we have the 7th National Development Plan. The outcome is the well-being of the people, and these are the indicators that will show that we have arrived. And then each year I'm working towards achieving that indicator, but I'm not working alone. And I think that we need to move away from thinking government and the central and Lusaka is the only one that will do it. I think for me, this multi-sectoral approach, integrated, making everybody count, will help us move this. But more than that are the fact that I, as a permanent secretary, will have key result areas, key performance indicators against which I'm measured. And I think that if we're going to go forward, then we must say, if year in and year out, you're not performing according to the performance indicators, surely I must be relieved of my duties, because then I have failed. So there must be a different way of measuring these smooth talkers in actually moving to implementation and measurable indicators that actually show that we're moving from point A to point B. And even though you may be pessimistic, I think we have moved. If you look at the history of this country, at independence we only had 100 graduates. Surely we have many more. The only challenge I see is that at this time in the history of the country, we should be futuristic looking. And I think that's why this ministry was created. I must be able to talk to my colleagues in education and say, stop training kids for today. Train them for 2030 and 2063. Therefore, change your curriculum, but also change the way you communicate so that they can take on national values. I mean, we all talk about Singapore. And we are saying, oh, Singapore had the same GDP as Zambia at independence. They were colonized by the British, they were same, but they have moved from being a third world country to a first world country. What have they done? One of the things that I think is important is education, and not just education in terms of being schooled. but education in being open-minded, education in this technological era to be able to take on technology and use it to our advantage. But more than that, I think it's what the president has been talking to, as well as the Minister for National Guidance. What are our values as a people? Who are we as Zambians? So that really we have a grounding in who we are and what we want to become, as opposed to this person or this country comes in partnership with us and we shift. I think we need to spend time, identify the goals, set them and work towards that.
Has that been done already?
It has. And I think that one of the things that we all keep saying is Zambia is very good at writing policies, developing programs. And other countries come here, learn, and go implement, and they are ahead of us. So that's why you will hear me keep going back to the fact that one of the things that this 7th National Development Plan is going to focus on is implementation. Implementation, but that can be measured.
And you're running a team, because obviously you're not working alone. What for you will be a risk, or are you running a risk of being part of something that can't work because you maybe have some bad eggs? This country is still grappling with corruption, for example. How can you achieve when you've got bad eggs in the system that need to be rooted out? Does that pose a threat that perhaps what you think should happen might not?
It does. And I think that for me, in that sense, then even the way the civil service is run needs to change. And I see that a lot of countries that have done that have also borrowed from the private sector, where you are clearly working to see profit. And if you're not contributing to that, why should they keep you? So even in terms of the way we're running as civil servants, we must have ethics that guide the way we work. But we must also have areas that are very important. So like I'm going back to what are our national values as a country? And so if we are reading off corruption, then we must have things that we are good at and replacing it with. So one of the chapters in the 7th National Development Plan in its early stages was asking, who are we as a people? And some people were saying, no, we can't call ourselves lazy. It's very negative because there are some hardworking people there. And then we say, but generally speaking, aren't we laid back? Don't we want somebody else to be the person that takes the hard work? Look at our homes. How many dependents do you have? Do they even get up to clean the surrounding? And I've been telling some of my colleagues, put these children to task. If they're not in school, give them something to do. So I think the way we view ourselves as a people needs to change. And I think that for me, what goes on in my private life does not remain in my private life. If I'm employed in public sector, those traits will come to the fore. And as you correctly say, then they need to be challenged, but there must be a system in place that measures my performance, that measures. You know, one of the things that is hardest to prove, at least I can give you that example having worked in the UN, if I'm going to dismiss somebody, I must have a track that shows I brought this issue to the attention of the person and I developed an improvement performance plan so that the person improves. All these things must be done before you can actually say, look, you are incorrigible, so we're dismissing you. That's a lot of hard work. And it can take away your energy from implementing programs because now you have a number of, and that's why I think therefore the recruitment process that we do, I'm saying, should not just look at my qualifications. What have I done to show that I have commitment to see this country develop? Even as a student, what are those traits in me that go beyond just getting A and A+ in class? What have I joined as extracurricular that maybe takes my time on Saturday to go and teach underprivileged children? Have I been part of that? If not, how do you expect me to serve a country? So we should go beyond just qualifications and begin looking at a display of characteristics, aptitudes that show that I'm willing to serve my country.
We have the issue of, since yours is to monitor and evaluate, shoddy jobs that have been done on some projects like roads and abandoning of work. How are you ensuring that these works are well monitored from the beginning and to the end?
We have a department in the ministry that is looking at program and projects investment, doing a cost-benefit analysis first and say, what will this bring to the country if we were to take these programs and projects on? But then at the level of actually monitoring, staff from my office have gone on spot monitoring and found exactly the things you're saying. And year in, year out, we write reports. Until I pushed my colleagues and said there must be an example somewhere where we can borrow. And one of the things, for example, that came up is instead of having projects and programs being reported on PAC, the parliamentary committee, that accounts committee that looks at this, can we have even the investigative and enforcement wing present? If they smell a rat, something fishy went on here, can they take it up on immediately and investigate? I think lack of doing that has led to Zambians believing you can abuse, you can start work, you can get money and not finish what you're doing and go off and nobody will be after you.
Right.
So I think that from a monitoring perspective, that needs to happen. That we actually reporting something that has not happened, who is taking it on, that's one. But in terms of shoddy work, I'm not an engineer. So even if I were to go out and monitor, if I'm not accompanied by engineers, I wouldn't know that this is a substandard road. So for me, that calls for that cohesive working as a team in government without saying, oh no, this belongs to Ministry of Transport and Communication. I'm from Ministry of Planning and I'll go and monitor. But how do we work together? And then hold accountable the staff that are supposed to make sure that this road is of good standard.
Are we yet to see litigation against some of these cases?
I think there have been some. Mm-hmm. There have been some, and I hope that that will send strong waves of caution to anybody else who wants to do that. I think there have been some, and at least I've read about them, and I've heard some of these things being talked about on radio. So they are happening, but maybe we need to heighten that, so that we send a clear message that this is unacceptable and there are consequences when this happens.
How do you send a message that this is a new era, this is a new approach to to monitoring and evaluating works that the government wants to to see done to the satisfaction of Zambians?
So like now we have the 7th National Development Plan. What we are working now on are implementation plans. As soon as you have the implementation plan, you actually send it to our ministry. And within that, you have your milestones and the targets that you want to achieve by a certain period of time. And we will monitor. So this will not just be that you can change when you realize it's not working. As soon as you submit, you have no control to change what you have submitted. And I think that the experience I had with ministries reporting to the president, I think that has sent a message that the leader of this country wants things done, and he wants a quarterly report, and things must be done. If you have not been done, there must be a good reason why that hasn't happened. So we'll continue with those quarterly report meetings, but we will also have monitoring systems. We're working on some monitoring and training of staff, because as you said, and I agree with you at the beginning, there was a weakness of systematically monitoring.
Right.
So we must equip the staff in the various ministries who have been appointed as monitoring and evaluation officers with skills. So we're training them, but we are also facilitating their work by making this IT-based so that we can get some of the results in record time. And even when you are despondent, I think that, for example, we quickly knew how many metric tons of maize we produced. It didn't take us 8 months. So we're making progress. And I think for me, one of the things that I believe, even at a personal level, if you want to see progress, number the things that are happening that are good, and they'll multiply. But we see them and ignore them and focus on, and what you focus on grows. So if we focus on possibilities and the potential that this country has, and when one happens, let's record those so that even at a national level, at the end of the year, when we are counting, you can look back and say, yes, we saw that happen.
Well, part of your mandate is to provide, or at least I'm sure that you want to provide statistical data as to how progress is being done. How's that going?
We're working very closely with Central Statistics Office. So even when the sectors present their implementation plan, one of the things that is happening is having statistics. So even the IT-based monitoring tool that we are using includes a lot of statistics. Without evidence, without statistics, without facts and figures, it's very difficult even for us to say we have moved. So as soon as the 7th National Development Plan begins to be implemented, we require baseline from every ministry, so that we start in 2017 on this note. 2018 we'll be able to say we've moved or not moved. And one of the things that we are also looking at, what are the low-hanging fruits? Like when you are saying people are in a hurry, yes. So for us to actually not lose momentum is to find what are the low-hanging fruits in this sector. Can we do that quickly while we look at the long term? So we'll be doing two things concurrently, addressing the short term and medium, and looking at the long term, so that those of us who are impatient and want to see something happen will be encouraged when these low-hanging fruits are.
And finally, do you ever worry that you might be headed for failure?
Yes, I think that keeps me awake. And one of the things is, how do you actually move civil service to be so conscious of the fact that they are in these privileged positions to serve? And for me, that is so basic. When we have seen that, then I will not view my work as just giving me a salary. It will go beyond and say, when I worked at this ministry for even this period of time, what was my contribution? And until that is registered in all of us, I wonder whether we'll get to where we want. But I don't want to be a pessimistic. So what I do, every opportunity I have, I remind my staff that there are many Zambians who are walking out there without a job. And I have been privileged to do. How am I doing it? So if I achieve nothing other than that constant reminder that I'm here as a public servant, and I'm here to see that the area in which I'm working, things are happening. That's one. But I think that putting in place a tight system that monitors, I don't want to wait 5 years when the plan is ending to actually say we failed.
Right.
And so it's important that every quarter I'm sitting with my staff and say, where are we? Before the ministries can make their presentation to the president, we should be working with the sectors on a monthly or bi-weekly and help them arrive at a quarterly report that they are also proud of.
Dr. Ponga, thank you very much for appearing on Sunday Interview.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. And that's it, I'm afraid, that we had for you. Been speaking to Dr. Auxilia Ponga. She's the PS Monitoring and Evaluation Ministry of National Development Planning. And until we meet on yet another edition of Sunday Interview, I hope you picked some valuable information. I'm Franklin Tembo Jr. Goodbye.